All right. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. I guess as we let people kind of keep on logging in, we'll take a couple minutes before we actually dive into the nitty-gritty of the webinar, and kind of as a warm-up question and to fill in the blanks and not just wait here for 3 minutes while people log in dead and awkward silence. I was curious to hear our panelists' take on the recent acquisition of Slack by Salesforce. Is that exciting? Is it worrying that our Salesforce overlords are just like swooping deeper into our organizations? And does it mean anything to you, or what does it mean for the world of PLG? Just curious on anyone's hot take. And Dave, as our recent joinee, do you want to maybe like give your take on that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of opinion on it. There's so much commentary. You know, about a year and a half ago, they also bought my competitor Tableau, and so you know, I was very interested in that. They do seem to be bringing these together. You know, I think the future, you know, there's so much distributed SaaS, and people now are trying to bring that back together, and it's a lot about how they work together in SaaS suites. And we'll see if Slack can help Salesforce be more integrated. I think of all the suite products, Salesforce has tended to be less integrated. They have a tougher time getting their softwares to work really well together, where you know, other suites like Atlassian do a really amazing job of getting their software suites to work together. So we'll see. Maybe Slack can help them with that.
Any hot takes from you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually both interesting and relevant for the PLG discussion. I think that as you think about Slack, it's probably one of the more well-known PLG first companies, very growth-oriented, very much about a heavy focus on like what the user experience is in their first couple of minutes and how it shares with their team and that kind of stuff. And then watching their go-to-market model evolve over the next, 3, 4, 5 years after launch, moving up market, moving into enterprise. So the shift to Salesforce is interesting in that regard. And then from the Salesforce side, it's it's a product they can sell wall to wall within enterprises versus the prior products, which have been a bit more oriented towards specific functions. So it's interesting across both those dimensions.
Darius, any hot takes?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one way to look at it is from kind of a go-to-market perspective. This feels like Salesforce's biggest jump into the bottoms-up SaaS market. Whereas if you look at Tableau and they're obviously the historical product, it was very much more like sales-driven, top-down, longer sales cycles. And so I think this is partly a recognition of the power of PLG, that this is the way that things are sold in the future, or at least the way that customers are accessed, for a later sales motion. I also think, it's worth celebrating Slack. Slack was a company that, didn't even start out in SaaS, kind of lucked into SaaS or got into SaaS like in their second motion, and then built an amazing company in that space. And so it's interesting to look at non business focused founders succeeding in the space, and to such a degree. I mean, it was one of the largest acquisitions ever, and the largest one in SaaS, excluding Redshift. And so it's a pretty big, it's a pretty big success for the PLG space, I would say, and definitely validates the growth there. The other thing I think is that I think there are wins of being an independent company, and there are wins of being combined with other resources in a suite. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see where Salesforce goes with it. I feel like the cultures are going to be interesting to interact with too, as they merge.
Yeah, and thanks for the great segue. I think it's definitely something really interesting to see how Slack is very different from from the acquisition of Chatter, where Chatter was really just adding something into Salesforce and making one functionality better. And this is really kind of a big step into the PLG world. And Salesforce has kind of been slowly moving that way. Seeing that they're now trying to do more of an expansion with product, and having more footprint is definitely interesting. And so I guess that's a good warm up, and it seems like we have most of the folks who are going to join that are online now. So maybe we can dive into today's topic. So I want to start with a tiny bit of housekeeping, then we'll do a proper introduction of our awesome panelists that have brought all of you here today. And we'll keep some time for any questions that you might have. So please use the questions in Livestorm. So on the right of your screen, you should have the ability to ask questions, and feel free to upvote questions that are already been asked and that you think are relevant, and we'll address those either as we go or towards the end of the event today. So we are going to be recording, and there will be, of course, a recording available of this. So the good thing is you'll be able to just come back to the URL that you used to access the webinar to get access to the recording. And yes, please do use the chat. I see a lot of people are kind of sharing where they are from, which is awesome. So keep on doing that. If you want to ask questions or ask for introductions to people in the chat, please do. The point is to do this for you more than for us. So without further ado, let's jump into the introductions. I'll stop sharing my screen, but ultimately, to make it straightforward, I think the questions we'll ask our awesome panelists is who they are, what company they work for, and one example of a awesome PLG company that isn't theirs, of course, and why they think it's a great example. So we'll start with Darius from Airtable. Super excited to have you here, and yeah, I'll let you take it over.
Cool. Thanks for having me. I'm Darius Contractor from Airtable. I lead growth there, previously leading growth at Facebook Messenger. So what does Airtable do? Airtable is a workflow orchestration tool, really a database that you can use to run your team that's as easy to use as a spreadsheet. It's loved by any teams that needs more powerful custom tools, especially like marketing, product teams, video production teams, those kinds of things. And as far as an inspiring PLG company, this might be a little bit unusual, but one company I really look up to that I think is doing amazing stuff is a company called Omaze, O-M-A-Z-E. And what they do is they have celebrities like put together kind of like offers, like you can meet with a celebrity. And the way people get that meeting is they like put in money to kind of like gamble for a chance to meet the celebrity. And then it's so interesting to meet with the celebrity, and the pitch is so exciting that it actually goes viral. And so they're effectively using like some combination of celebrities and like kind of gambling and virality to drive money for charities, which I think is a really smart approach. And so I think of it as product-led because effectively it's the people who spread it.
Love it. And it's kind of a PLG and maybe like better take on the Fire app. And you don't need to organize a disaster or a festival to get virality. And it seems like it's for a good cause also, not just for rappers
yes,
increasing their wealth.
More people now know about the Fire festival.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, super excited to have you. Matt, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. My name's Matt Hudson. I lead the growth and go-to-market teams at Coda. I've been there for about 6 years or so. Prior to that, I was Google and YouTube as the product manager leading our data and data science efforts. I was the chief of staff for the guy running all of YouTube's product managed team. Coda is an all-in-one doc. Combines kind of the best of documents, spreadsheets, applications, or databases, kind of into one single surface. Kind of the thesis of it starts from you start a project with a simple use case like meeting notes, one-on-one strategy docs or whatnot. But over time, your team evolves, and that Coda doc kind of becomes the backbone for how the team operates. Project hubs, launch calendars, meeting notes, all that stuff kind of lives in one place. To your question on most inspiring PLG, it's interesting. I was going to pick Slack only because right now I'm very tuned into like the evolution of go-to-market models as companies get later and later into their life cycle. Since we already talked about it, maybe the next one I'll pick, again, similarly at the end of the spectrum on their life cycle is Zoom, where I think you see another example of a company that with everything that happened in 2020, their business just exploded, and some of the investments they made on the product side made it very easy for that to happen. To scale to magnitudes that, at the end of 2019, no one was really expecting. But But with that scale came all sorts of different go-to-market challenges that made them go revisit some of their assumptions and approaches, in particular around security and data location and stuff like that. But it kind of demonstrates like what the impact of scale happens to kind of how you would approach things in the past to how you're doing it going forward.
Super interesting. Awesome. Well, thank you. And Dave?
Yeah, I'm Dave. I'm the founder and CEO of Chartio. And so Chartio, we're a business intelligence company. We have the mission to enable anyone in a company, not just data teams, to explore and understand their data. So companies, you really run on your data. Like marketing teams, if they're more informed than another marketing team, they're the ones who are going to win. They're the ones who are going to ditch campaigns that don't work and double down on campaigns that do. And so we're really all about making everyone in a company, not just that data person, able to work with that data. With that, we built a product called Visual SQL. We basically made SQL visual, and you're able to go and write queries in a visual drag and drop way. And I guess one of we use all the time, we're really impressed with and love Figma as a product-led company. It's just such a well-loved product. There's no like hack or like anything like that got their growth. It's like they just really made something innovative and collaborative and easy enough. It's like both powerful enough for designers to love and utilize, but then easy enough for other people to participate and collaborate in. And it's just huge. So they really just have executed well. Time and time again, when I'm looking at like examples, like, okay, who's made a great page on this? Who's like got a great hiring page? Who's got, a great video? When I'm looking for inspiration, like they just kind of nail it. And so impressive company.
Awesome. Makes a ton of sense. And very quickly, I'm Francis. I'm the co-founder at Mad Kudu. And Mad Kudu, we're a marketing intelligence platform that helps marketers execute faster, and we help them address all the operational challenges of dealing with data. And essentially, it's like providing the same level of detail and capabilities as building a super complex in-house, like analytics-heavy solution, but keeping it within the hands of marketers so that they can execute segmentation, predictions, forecasting really easily. And for my PLG company, I play the guitar, and I'm a huge fan of Guitar Pro, which is a software that essentially loads music sheets, and you can play them at different speed. You can like loop some specific parts of it. And what I really love about their approach is that they're a user-generated content first. So essentially, if you are a user of that tool, you have power users who will transcribe specific songs, and then they make them available for people to download. But to be able to use it, you need to have the product. So essentially, it's like users create all this content for free, and that generates downloads, and it leads the community to grow, which I think is an awesome approach. And it's really content first in a B2C world. So that's it on my part. Maybe jumping into the questions that we had today. So the first question that we wanted to address was looking at your different companies. All of them are product led, and I think there's one interesting question of why, from a strategic standpoint, did the company decide to go with a product led approach? And was it like towards making acquisition easier? Was it for virality? And just like starting to hear your take on why the company was product led, and that kind of opens it up to if people should think about having a product led approach to their acquisition. So maybe Matt, we'll start with you, if you don't mind giving us a sense for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Coda, the choice was, I'd actually say part of it was driven by just more secular trends. As you think about enterprise or B2B software, there's a pretty well-trodden theme now of consumerization of it, and users within businesses expecting software in the workplace to work as well as it does in their day-to-day consumer apps or whatnot. For Coda itself, it's a horizontal product, which means that it's both intended to be used by and is used by almost all functions across industries, large enterprises, small and medium businesses. and even in personal scenarios. So someone can, we've seen folks that plan their weddings in Coda. We've seen folks run large cross-functional projects to ship a new version of an app to ice cream shops in Mexico, kind of running on top of Coda. With that kind of spread, as you think about go-to-market motions, a traditional sales-led one clearly wouldn't scale across all of those verticals, all of those altitudes of organizations or whatnot. So I think PLG clearly had to be, front and center in how we thought about how that motion would work. I think the one clarification I'd give is we fully intend to build out a hybrid model, one that is very PLG oriented, in particular across the tail, but as you start to move up market, to deploy the right level of sales or success folks to help larger organizations transition some of their workflows or help define some of their processes or whatnot.
And so to clarify for those who might not know, today from a ability to buy Coda, is it like only credit card swiping, or is it already a hybrid of you can swipe the credit card or you can talk to a rep that will sign annual or whatever kind of contracts?
Yeah, it's both. It's both. So Coda itself is a freemium product, so you can use the product for free and get lots of value out of it. And then for folks that want access to some of those features or whatnot, there's sign up with a credit card, annual or monthly. And then for enterprise customers or larger mid-market, there's also a SKU that we'll work with them and a salesperson to define a contract and an engagement or whatnot.
Makes sense. Super helpful. And maybe I think that's a good segue to Darius, if you want to tell us about Airtable and why it was designed as PLG, and maybe also like what the I guess like the mix looks like from a ability to purchase a product.
Yeah. So Airtable's mission in the world is to democratize the ability to create software. Like really, if you look at all history thus far, software has been created by people who are like local experts, often like going to university to figure out how to do this. And arguably, it's the most powerful skill that we've invented in the last few hundred years of the ability to create software. Like clearly, the people who can do it can do tremendous things. And so we're trying to bring that ability to everyone. Like anyone who needs software, which is mostly anyone, should have the ability to create it themselves. So it's kind of fundamentally like a bottoms-up product where like the users are the people who get the most value out of it to start with. And so that's part of the reason we went with the product-led growth motion of we want people to use the software, build their own apps, build things that they find useful, and then as they like become more useful, they'll spread to their companies, their coworkers, outside their companies, all that kind of stuff. So somewhat like Coda, we also have a hybrid model. Both bottoms up, people can get the software, they can pay for it themselves with a credit card. They can also reach out to our sales team or relatively early in the flow, ask for a demo and get an understanding of like how the software works and what it could do for their company. So we do have like also a hybrid motion. We are primarily like product-led growth bottoms up, partly because that's more scalable. There are more like small and tiny companies out there than like medium-sized and large companies. And so, that's why we decided on product-led growth. It also just, there's a way in which I think it actually helps adoption long-term to actually have people on the ground succeeding with your product. Like, I think it's a little bit harder to go to like the head of IT and say, hey, you should have everyone use this software. And they'll be like, why? These days, there's so many great solutions that people can start using on their own, like all the solutions here. And then they can go to IT and say, hey, like I really love this solution. Could we do something bigger with this? And that's kind of an easier motion to do in companies today.
That makes sense. Awesome. And I think like speaking of that, Dave would love to get your take on that, because I think the challenges, especially in kind of the BI world of having to go to IT to make sure that you can, have access to reading data that might be sensitive, which is relevant for reporting, will be super interesting. So love to hear your take on that.
Yeah. Being product-led was never an easy decision. And in fact, we've gone back and forth a few times. We've been sales-led, then product-led, kind of back and forth a few times in our motions over the years. And now we're very strongly and permanently in the product-led motion. And the reasons for that, I've read a lot of articles out there that really say, like when you should be a product-led company and when you shouldn't. And actually, like the quintessential example of when you shouldn't, they say, is like BI. And that's my space. And it's because it's so complicated to set up. Like you have to connect data, there's security questions, there's like, you got to be technical. And that is like a tough part in our funnel. Like people, like, can they intuitively get it? And there's just a lot of hurdles. And so that definitely like hurts your product led. It's just not a super low friction funnel. At the end of the day though, we're a mission-driven company first and foremost, and then from go-to-market, just looking at like product-led versus sales-led, what aligns with that mission, what'll help us get to that mission like more directly. When BI is also in data, there's such a long tail of features to build, right? There's like, that's one of the things I actually love about it. It's like there's never going to be an end to like more things people want to do with data and more features to add to the product. It's a very complicated product. And so when you're sales led, you really kind of end up in these comparisons with competitors, and they very much kind of steer you towards like checklists of features. And we started really going down a path of like adding all these bells and whistles, kind of the things around the heart of the product, and adding like more of what our competitors had, because, we lost this deal because we didn't have like that chart type, or we lost this deal because we didn't have like support for whatever. We start building all these things, and they didn't really affect or impact the core of the product. They weren't really impacting our mission. And so, when you're a product-led company, things like ease of use and time to value, those really matter. And that is the same as with our mission. If we want to make business users able to work with data, ease of use, time to value, flexibility, those things all matter. So product-led really just lined up, our incentives really lined them up really well with our mission. It's very differentiated in our space as well, which is one of the other reasons. Because of all the reasons I mentioned, it's definitely a hard challenge to be product-led in business intelligence, but that's also kind of the opportunity. And so people have tried and really kind of steered off and built out big services teams. People have really tried to be product-led in our space, but it hasn't worked. And so that's also one of the areas to super innovate on.
Makes sense. We're already getting some pretty awesome questions actually in the questions section. So I do want to address right now the top rated one, which I think is super relevant and maybe more for Darius and Matt initially. I know the question is like specifically for Coda, but since Airtable also has a freemium motion. So the question is, how do you decide which product features to gate in your freemium offering versus what you make available in freemium? So Darius or Matt, if you want to quickly take that one.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think in some ways it comes down to like the soul of the product-led growth movement, because the analogy that I like to do for it is, people have like been to Costco or like walked by some place where they give out like free samples. You want to give enough free samples that people are like, this is really good. Maybe I'll go into the place or like buy the full package of whatever this thing is. But ideally, you don't want to give enough free samples that they're like, that was lunch, I'm done. And so there's a little bit of tension there. The other thing I'll add to it is that it's not just kind of a one-player game, it's a multiplayer game for almost all of these products, where you really are trying to get the team excited about it. And so at a high level, I think you want to give away enough functionality, also for a long enough period, it doesn't have to be forever, that people really fall in love with your product, and ideally make it a habit. They're like, wow, this product's amazing, and I find myself using it every day. So you usually want to give them enough time that they can get to that point. And that's very different for different products. It could be that for some products that require some setup, that could be weeks or possibly months, likely weeks. For other products, it could be days. It could just be like you have a few Slack conversations and you realize like, this is great. This is way better than sending individual G-chats, 10 years ago. So I'd try to find what that threshold is. One way to find that threshold is to look at your data and look at like different usage statistics, and as people hit different thresholds, do predictive analysis and recall analysis as to, for someone at this threshold, or maybe a team at this threshold, what's the likelihood they're going to retain? And once you get to the point where people are retaining, then you can start thinking about layering in more monetization metrics. You don't need 100% of people to retain at that level, but once it looks like, okay, people get it now, layering that in. The other thing I'll add is that oftentimes with these products, someone as Dave was speaking to, there's different features that people use at different levels of the product. And so oftentimes the things that they're going to use, I think of it as the first few days. You want to make free and amazing and fast to value. Very often after they use those a bunch, they're going to need other products. They're going to be like, wait a sec, I now have a bunch of tables or a bunch of dashboards, or there's a bunch of different people making edits. How do I keep track of it? And those are often really good places to put monetization, because just the need for that feature automatically qualifies the person as like a committed user.
Yeah, which I guess like maybe one nuance or like additional question before we jump to Matt, but I think very often there's this idea that if you have a freemium motion, you really need to gate most of the features. But I have seen some hybrid motions work really well where it's a freemium, like from a long-term perspective, it's freemium, but there is a initial trial timeframe during which you have access to most of the features, so that what you don't want to do is like gate someone from using some of the more advanced features that are premium during this initial kind of trial phase. But if you don't then buy at the end of the trial, you kind of like get bucketed back into the freemium offering. So is that something that that you folks think about at Airtable? Is it something that you've implemented? And is that part of like when you do the analysis to figure out like what are these things that people do that lead them to convert? Do you need it to be opened in some form of a whatever like time frame where people can use it before they switch to premium?
Yeah, you're 100% right, and it's a good flag. So what they need to do, I think, is understand the value of the premium features without getting all the value, to my like sample example. And so you're right. So one thing Airtable has right now is a 14-day trial where you get full access to Pro. You get all the apps, all the limits, all the colors, all the things that people love about Pro. You get full access. You can use it, start to really understand the value. And then we ask you to, hey, like convert from your trial to like a paid account after that time. And we have like a lower level free plan that we put people on. And that is the chance for people to like understand those features. But I think it is interesting to reflect. There's also products where the free version really gives you a usage limited amount of like the critical features. Like I think two I'll point to are Slack gives you 10,000 messages and Asana gives you 1,000 tasks. And I almost feel like if you're hitting those numbers, while those numbers seem high, it's very easy to add a task or add a message, of course. And you surprisingly quickly, with a group of people doing it, hit those numbers. And I think those are like good self-qualifying locations where, hey, like once you send 10,000 messages, like you probably get it. You probably really like the product. And so I think, and really it's just the same thing. It's a usage limit rather than a feature limit, which I think can also be really healthy because you exactly understand the value of this product that you just need more of.
Makes sense. And since, the question was initially for Coda, curious to hear, Matt, any take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the same core principles apply to the point of being able to look at some of your data to understand it a bit, to give context on how we went through that process with Coda. So we launched our 1.0 in February of 2019, so it's still a pretty recent product. And when we launched, we didn't actually have any pricing whatsoever. So the entire product was free to use. And as we shifted gears to start focusing on what our business model was going to look like and how pricing was going to work, we had ample data to go look at it. So I think at the time we had something like 25,000 teams using Coda. And there's probably two important distinctions or statements that we were able to make kind of looking at it. One of them was a pretty fundamental one just on like the usage patterns we saw in the product, and that was the importance of makers. So internally, we kind of think of our users across a few different persona type, but the most important one for us is doc makers, the folks that actually create and build these docs that other teammates or whatnot build, collaborate and edit in. And actually, here I'll post, as this is, unlike a live panel or in person, I can actually give examples in the chat. So I'll post a little piece here in the chat just on, there's some charts in there that show as we looked at different teams of different sizes and the way that they adopted the product, the relationship between individuals and docs and across docs and teams all varied a bunch. And it kind of led us to this model of maker billing, where we only charge for the doc creator, not for editors or collaborators within them. That choice alone has a big impact in terms of how we look at pricing tiers, because it means that most of that orientation now is going to be focused on pricing around what maker actions matter, not anything else. I think the second one was we had kind of written up like a first principle from a product perspective of we wanted everyone to be able to build a doc as powerful as an app. I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but on its surface, Coda is just a blinking cursor where you can take meeting notes in. But as you add things like tables and buttons and automations and formulas, you can actually build something pretty sophisticated. And we wanted to make sure that for anyone trying Coda, they'd have that opportunity. So as we kind of looked across our building blocks, we made sure that there was some component of every single one of them in that free tier. Maybe it had usage limits, maybe it had some aspect of feature limits, but at the very least, a flag would be planted. After that, I'd say most of the decision then went around to a set of second order observations. Probably the primary one was just around audience. As we looked at, we've got 4 SKUs, free, pro, team, and enterprise. And working backwards on the enterprise SKU, it's a little bit more self-evident of what things folks would care about from an audience perspective there, admin tooling, security, service, that kind of piece. And as you work backwards, you can see like different team sizes, different packs, different features would matter more. So we finished out some of those finer grain details at that level.
Makes sense. Awesome. Well, thanks for providing, for going over this. Maybe moving, because I know we are going to be short on time because like this is a topic that is dear to everyone's hearts. But one of the questions that I wanted to go over, in the hopes of helping the folks that are here today is, if you can tell us about one PLG challenge that you've encountered, that you've overcome, and that could be helpful to the audience. And Dave, if you don't mind starting with that and telling us a bit about that challenge.
Yeah, I'll talk about one that we've just solved and we're launching very shortly. So to be determined yet whether it solves it, but we found 80% of people that connect to database don't have foreign keys set up in their data. So a lot of the data warehouses and stuff don't even support foreign keys. And what that means is our whole interface kind of sucks on top of it. Like you can only explore one table. It doesn't. One of the great powerful things about Visual SQL is it just does joins across tables automatically for you. And so people have a pretty bad first experience if it's not automatically set up. And you can go manually do it, but of course, like people don't go manually do that kind of thing. And you try to prompt it in the app and stuff like that. But we've used all our historical data and AI to automatically detect those foreign keys, so it'll just make that experience just way better for everybody connecting. So there's a lot of those technical hurdles and challenges like that that are really fun to solve and really important for product like growth.
That's super interesting, I guess that's something that I'm just curious. Like, how did you come up with the realization? I mean, it's like pretty core to the product, right? To have like this foreign key, which basically is how do you relate different objects together. Was that something that came from analysis, from customer interviews? When did it kind of appear as being a core issue?
Yeah, actually from a little bit of both. Like we heard it from customers, and then but a lot of times also it's interesting. You don't hear from those customers because they just go away right away. And so we heard a little bit. And then, when we would user test, we're like, oh, this is intuitive. This is fine. People should be getting this. But that was on this perfect data set. And so it is interesting. And we partly discovered it by user testing with people going through trial and watching people go through trial. And then we looked at the data and just pulled the number and like, oh, holy crap. We thought it was maybe more like 10% of people didn't have foreign keys, but it was 80. And so, then we realized it's a much bigger deal. And that helps get everybody behind it. Oh, yeah, there's a huge opportunity here.
Yeah, I love it. I think, that's one of the things that's interesting. Like in PLG, I find like sometimes we tend to be very, very analytics driven. I think one of the challenges with analytics is that you can only measure what you can observe. And sometimes it's actually what you cannot observe that yields the highest potential for growth. And that's like one of the things where we tend to like dive into dashboards and things like that. But ultimately, there's still a ton of value as like product managers or even marketers of watching a given user go through the experience, talking to people that weren't successful in using the product to figure out like where there's like some big opportunities and not just like incremental improvements to an existing product. So super interesting.
As a data company, we talk a lot actually about user testing as well. We really rely heavily on it. And I think there is some stuff that some charts can tell you where the mistake is or that there's something wrong. But it often takes user tests and really drilling in like that to figure out like what's wrong, and also to communicate it to your team. Like to sometimes a chart just doesn't inspire emotion and alignment. It just looks like, oh, there's like, that's one statistic. Only 20% of people are passing this step in the funnel. Okay, but it's been like that for a while. It's a big deal. But then when you watch some people struggle there, when you watch them get confused, then everyone's like, oh, we should fix that. Totally. There's an emotional component that a user test brings as well. Data, unfortunately, unless it's like a really big swing, doesn't inspire much emotion.
Makes sense. Cool. Matt, do you want to maybe share one insight there on the PLG challenge?
Yeah, my first reaction to Dave first was data makes me real excited. I don't know who doesn't get excited about that. So one early on we noticed, so back to like Coda timeline, we launched our 1.0 in 2019, but we had like a closed beta, early alpha for a year or two before that. And some of the big observations that came out of that period were, for a surface like Coda, where it's meant to look like a document, blinking cursor, write anything, it actually provides, in that scenario where it's blank and empty and blinking cursor, that's very intimidating for a lot of folks. Like you're not really sure what to do next. One observation was that when folks started from a use case where they saw what someone else had done or had read about it or whatnot, it spurred a totally different level of activity. So one of the big things that we launched earlier this year was, we call it publishing, but it's the ability to take like a doc that you built or way of working, publish it as an artifact that other folks can read and make a copy of to use or whatnot. And that changes kind of like the door in which a lot of people would sign up and start using Coda for, and that instead of starting from a blank experience, they'd start with something in mind. They'd start with an example someone else had already done. That's kind of like one example. There's also just the feeling in the product of taking like small pieces of those examples and making little in-doc templates, is what we call them internally, but it allows you to like jumpstart. Oh, I'm in a meeting, I want to have a quick table where I can upvote and downvote questions. I can really quickly just drag and drop that in as I'm taking notes to kind of keep the team on track or whatnot. Interestingly, it's kind of presented its own set of challenges. As one example, this question always ends up with a 50-50 response rate. Have you folks seen Game of Thrones or watched Game of Thrones a bunch? I imagine some of the folks on chat, yes and no. I typically see 50-50. This will only ruin the very end of season 1, but kind of the theme for the whole show is that they kill off the main characters like all the time. So when season 8 came out or season 7 came out the other year, someone on our team had built like a simple doc, or a little published doc that was a Game of Thrones death pool. So you would like make a copy of it, share it with your friends or family, and then go vote which characters you think are going to live, die, and turn into a White Walker by the end of the season. Then each episode you'd be able to mark off kind of who's winning or not. The funny part of it was published it kind of in jest. Didn't really think much about it. But then 12 weeks later, we're talking to more customers that are using Coda for project tracking and whatnot, and we asked them how they got introduced to Coda, and a lot of them brought that up. Oh, through the Game of Thrones death pool or whatever. So one interesting dynamic for us is the diversity of use cases in which you can get introduced to the product is not necessarily the reason you stay around and use it with your team. And there's this somewhat interesting personal and professional boundary, at least for a tool like this, where we're in the process of looking for a demand marketing lead, and one of the big questions is finding someone that has that typical B2B chops, but also like maybe can leverage this like somewhat creative output or outlet to attract folks in different ways. Sorry, and I've got three kids behind me that are starting to move around.
No worries. The joys of the work remote 2020 setup. But I think that's a great segue into even the comment that Fauzia made in the chat for Darius, saying that she was using Airtable both for personal and for professional. I think it's always interesting that kind of, as we talk about kind of consumerization of software, there is like a lot of software that can be used in both cases, and that introduces both an opportunity and a challenge. I think from a demand gen perspective of like, you know, you need to have this like dual approach of, yes, I want to acquire like bigger brands that have the potential to generate a ton of ARR, but at the same time, like, you know, that a lot of the growth is like bottoms up from people using it and being exposed to that product on the personal side, and then bringing it into companies. And I know there's like even like folks from like Mongo or like all these kind of things where like engineering driven, where people will try it on their home project and then they push for that within their company. I mean, it's a big, I think it's a big challenge for marketers to walk that fine line of not just pushing for pure B2B, because you, remove like a huge potential from the people who use it on the personal side. But yeah, maybe Darius, like, excited to hear your kind of PLG story.
Yeah, I'll share one that's a little more kind of internal to the team. One of the biggest wins I've had while running product-led growth teams is actually making sure that the team's internal processes are well run. And that's actually one of the things that got me excited about Airtable. I was looking at how to build a great internal process, and I saw some different blog posts about it, but none of them were kind of like perfect. And I actually tried to use a spreadsheet for it, but like very quickly was overwhelmed by the volume of ideas and the things to track. And so I ended up using Airtable before I worked there to build this thing that I call Evelyn. And you can search for Evelyn Airtable, and you'll find like the base that I use for the team, which is pretty much allowing them to put in the ideas that they have for growth experiments. And then for each idea, we calculate the opportunity size in a rigorous way, put in our confidence that we'll reach the opportunity size, and then have an edge estimate. And those combined, we have a function that like multiplies the first two, divides by the last one, and gets us an opportunity ROI. And it's all based on the target metric for the team. And so what that means is that we not only have like a really well-sorted backlog of ideas to move that metric, but we also have kind of like a pipeline of ideas. Like we have ideas that we haven't yet opportunity sized, and then we have things we've opportunity sized but not built, and things that we are running currently. And each of them with Airtable, we sum up kind of the total opportunity size for each one. And then we get effectively a backlog. You can take to leadership and say, okay, this is the amount of, you know, X metric, like it could be users, revenue, or something else that we, you know, are currently running or currently building. And, you know, historically we've hit these kind of numbers. And it also allows you to check it, because everyone has like ideas going into it, but then you can actually check it in the final analysis of like, what was our opportunity size, you know, estimate versus like our actual final results. And it kind of gives you a check on the team. And the thing about this, it helps me as like a leader to put together the team and like prioritize things. But where I've seen it really transformative is really encoding in a system the priorities of the team. And by doing this, it lets everyone innovate within those priorities in a way that is like very bottoms up. Like the first time I did this at Dropbox, immediately the designer said, hey, instead of this idea I had, which is now at the bottom of the list because it's too hard to build, what if we did this version of it that would be like a 3-day build, and we can validate the idea. And instantly the idea jumped to the top of the list and we built it. And I just don't think it's very easy to have those kind of conversations where you communicate how to optimize every project with every person on the team, unless you can communicate a very structured framework for prioritization. So I really found this system to like help my teams get more results and actually do it more independently.
Yeah, and I know we've used it internally. Are you open sourcing like a template for that spreadsheet? Because I think that's something that people would be super excited about, and it sounds like something that could drive, like similar to the Game of Thrones thing, like drive a lot of usage. Yeah,
actually, I gave it to 1 or 2 growth friends, and you probably know G, and G uses it a bunch, and he's actually shared it with a bunch of other people, and they love it. They prefer the one where it's just ARR focused, and every project is effectively an ARR ROI, which I haven't yet found a company that's not interested in ARR or like revenue more generally, perhaps. And so like people seem to dig that. And Dave, I think you were going to add something on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, your comment. I just wanted to follow up on that. That's huge. The process comment of making sure it's like experimental, systematic, and that it's organized. And then you have a hypothesis of like, you know, whatever it is, it's going to increase ARR or like X conversion rate or whatever, and run them as experiments. And I think it helps people iterate quicker. It also morale-wise helps the team feel focused and organized, and that you're building and getting better. And then you can also be a lot more aware. Did I actually just make it worse? And you don't do that. And if there is that feeling and that lack of confidence that oh, this might make it worse, there's just so much more friction. You move so much slower. And so when you do that experimental process, and we do use Airtable for it, and I was going to say, but I've seen a lot of good ads that Figma does it with Coda. And was thinking about, I don't know. Sorry, I was just making it controversial.
Yeah, no, for sure. This is available. If you search for Evelyn space Airtable, you should get the universe post. Universes are like set of templates that you can download and start to use for yourself. And it not only has the base in it, but just as importantly, it has like kind of the instructions and like the specificity of how to use the base that can like get people going. I'm also open to answering questions like here and there about it, but it's something that we've found a lot of success with on the team.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I think it's it's core to every company. Cool. So we're getting close to the end. So, and there's like some awesome questions in the chat. So what I suggest we'll take a couple questions, and we'll try to do one person for the main answer, but please the rest of us like chime in and like offer thoughts and things like that around the question. So maybe I'll start with Dave. So this is a question from Randy at MongoDB. And the question is, can your product be too technical to go PLG, which I think makes sense given their product? And how do you identify which leads or prospects to go through the kind of like self-serve motion versus traditional sales rep, and potentially even something more than sales rep?
Yeah, so I kind of answered a little bit before, I think right before this question was asked. But yes, it can be too technical. And if people do need hand-holding and explanation, but that's also part of the challenge. Like that's also when you're on the forefront there, that's where you can innovate too. If it right now is too technical to be product-led, but can you figure out how to make it not too technical to make it product-led? That's what we're trying to do at Chartio. So there's potentially an opportunity there if you see one of those, but it can be also really, really freaking hard. Also, we frankly use Mad Kudu to flag whether somebody needs more of a high touch, whether they're at a larger company and they are like a data professional, and we can find those things out, and they give us a good score on whether that person should be in a sales funnel or just kind of a self-serve funnel.
Thanks for the plug in there. Darius and Matt, any thoughts on that?
I mean, the one thought that I'd make on it is I don't think it's a whole hog choice. Like you can do aspects of your motion that are maybe product led and aspects that aren't. Meaning that like there could be aspects of acquisition or activation that are a bit more sales led, and then there's aspects on the other end that are about spread or engagement or retention, or even monetization that are a bit more product led. So it doesn't. I don't think it necessarily has to be a binary choice. I think you can do kind of flavors of it.
I think also people with that combo, people are so much more inclined. I think for product led, so many more people sign up for trial and they want to try it than request a demo. And so you can kind of get them in, and sometimes even with Chartio, if they don't connect to data source, we have example dashboards that you can play with and kind of get a sense for, is this something I would like? And then if you do need more help, we're reaching out to you, or you can reach out to us. And so it's sometimes that hybrid, and that's one way to still be product led, but get over those technical hurdles. There's always different ways to get around it.
There's also some like in between motions, I'd say, like if you really focus on video onboarding or have kind of a university experience, it's still product led, but it's very much hand-holding. And on the other side, there's like webinars, which are kind of like demos at scale. And so that allows you to connect with customers in like a scaled way, but one where like it feels more personal and it communicates a more complex product.
Yeah, no, super helpful. Like one analogy I typically use is like people in a retail store. Like if you think of like how you allocate your reps in a jeans store, and like you can have people just at the cash register or just at the changing room or roaming the aisles, and it's about figuring out who's roaming the aisles but is like very clearly knows what they're looking for, and you just like wait for them at the cash register, versus like who's like clearly not sure how to pick like from the hundreds of jeans, and that's where a rep is actually going to help start the motion. So I think it's always a little bit more complicated, and part of it is like when you see someone walk in, you have a good sense of like where they're going to have a challenge, and that's where like either Mad Kudu or even just like, you know, you can ask questions to figure out like who they are and what their DNA seems to indicate they'll be able to do. But then there's also a pattern of just like behavioral patterns of like, do they seem like they're stuck somewhere, and having sales actually help them move to the next step. I think it's one of the things that I would say it's almost like it shouldn't be one versus the other. It's always like how do you have your reps actually help the product-led initiative. But awesome. Thanks for answering. I see, Darius, you're about to answer Eric. So maybe we can take that question, which I think is super interesting. And it's about the kind of analysis, not just analysis paralysis, but like going into a bunch of endless tests where the outcome is always like, yeah, like 50-50, it doesn't validate anything. And then, you just fall in love with some vanity metrics and you're not really changing the business. It's like mainly just incremental changes.
I'm happy.
That's kind of a data question, so I'll go. So first, a lot of you really have to upfront think about and know how much data you're going to be collecting, and really look, is that going to be statistically significant or not? So if it's like number of wins and you're only getting like 8 customers a month, you can't A/B test that. It would take years and years and years of data, and so many other things are going to change. And so, I think a combo of A/B testing only where the data is relevant, and then also user testing, but with tracking to make sure that you haven't made things worse, is a good combo to use all those things together. So where you can't A/B test, where there's not the volume, and again, you need pretty high volume of data. You really got to rely on user tests and intuition and tracking things to make sure, hey, it didn't drop off a cliff when I added this new feature.
Yeah, and Darius, like interesting on your take rate, because I think what you just mentioned about like a lot of people use your spreadsheet to focus on the ARR, that there's kind of that thing of like, wait, but is ARR really like the only metric that we want to, like we're falling in love with that one metric, not a vanity metric in that case, but like really a lagging indicator? And like, how do you make sure that, you know, you don't just like optimize for short-term wins, and that you're able to do tests that actually can move the business drastically?
Yeah, there's a few different ways. I think Dave hit it with like, you have to be thoughtful about how much data you have. Like if you only have 100 people signing up a day, there's no reason to be running A/B tests. You should talk to your users in that case. And I think the two things that are most valuable is first, figuring out what that kind of like successful user journey looks like. Like if you talk to a bunch of users and all the successful ones are like, oh yeah, day one, I shared it with my whole team, and like those people succeed and the solo users don't, then early in the product say, hey, you should share this with your whole team. And maybe not everyone will, but at least the people who have a chance of succeeding can like follow the train of success, you know, the kind of the thread of the successful users. So I try to like make your users like the successful ones as a starting place in lack of anything else. And then as you run experiments, first make sure you have enough data, or at least a bit of data. And it is worth flagging that if you run experiments where you have 30% gains, you actually don't need that much data. There's only so many experiments that do, but if you're, you know, early in your cycles, there is a chance of having, you know, such outsized winners that you don't need to run it that long. I think you need 1,000 exposures to get like a 20% gain or something like that, or actually 7%, and then it's 100 exposures for a 20% gain on each variant. And so that's actually not that many for many companies, but you have to be looking for those huge wins. The other thing you can do is when you run an experiment, you can like test it with users, both like manually. You can go to users and say, what do you think of this, you know, flow? Or you can put them through the flow on your website and then just talk to them afterwards. Like, hey, like, what did you think of like onboarding? Like, we're looking for feedback. And if people are like, I was confused, or I was this, if you can actually have a thorough survey or actually talk to them, that might give you more data for less exposures. If a few people tell you exactly what they thought of the flow, that could be as valuable as having 2,000 people go through it and just looking at the raw data. Also, vanity metrics should always tie back to like real metrics. So I'm a big fan of a dichotomy between what I'll call like local metrics and like goal metrics. And so the goal metric might be ARR, and like we're trying to actually grow this thing, and if we make more money, we're winning. But then having a local metric of like, we change this one part of the flow. Are we actually seeing people succeed at that part of the flow? Like if we change the invite page, are they sending more invites and are they getting to the next page? And if they are, then we can often declare success even without like stat-sig movements of our goal metrics.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think like one interesting takeaway from what Darius was just saying, I like the idea of like, if you're not getting 100 new users per day, then you probably shouldn't focus too much on A/B tests, but rather go talk to your users. I think that's a good, stick in the ground or line in the sand. And I feel like very often people are at lower volumes and already trying to do A/B tests and trying to do everything through analysis, when again, it goes back to this thing that I know I already mentioned, but it's so critical that like keep on talking to users, regardless of how deep you are into PLG. Awesome. I know we're at the top of the hour. This has been awesome, at least on my side. I do want to take time to thank our awesome panelists for joining us today. Thanks again for all the insights and all the awesome knowledge that you shared. And as I said, we'll have the recording available. You can find these awesome folks on LinkedIn pretty easily if you want to ask questions. And thanks again. Have an awesome day to everyone who's here, and we'll talk to you folks very soon.
Thanks, folks.
All right. Thanks again.
Thanks all.